So as we look at the IDN landscape, one of the significant limitations in many markets has always been the fact that there is a monopoly issue. So I'm from Atlanta. How many could there be? Now we're pretty much down to maybe a consolidation of 4 major IDNs for the area. And yet there are so many middle-sized cities in which there's always been one large hospital provider. And so I've always struggled with this. And I don't know, Mike, now in your consultancy world, if this comes up in your environment where you could be in a middle-sized city that really has a single IDN. And Dana, your knowledge of it, but there seems like because I wonder about how much consolidation can take place and how much further can it go? And is it a legal barrier, that is going to stop it because of this monopoly phenomenon that would happen? But that doesn't seem to make sense because so many markets, it is a monopoly.
I think it depends on whether it's a pre-existing monopoly or not. For example, we're a health system that is the only IDN in a community of 250,000. But there are no other hospitals, there are no other provider organizations, there are private practices. But then look at the FTC has stopped some, as you know, we've seen it. There have been regulatory barriers, and you can argue whether that's a good or a bad thing. But the fact is that there have been barriers. It was Northwestern Advocate was shot down. In the Northern Virginia market, Inova wanted to buy Prince William County, and they ended up being purchased by Novant in North Carolina. And I'm trying to figure out the logic of that acquisition still. So,
state loans.
Yeah. Oh, I understand the logic from the FTC standpoint.
Right.
I don't understand it from Novant's standpoint.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's. I don't know where it's going because again, there are some that are de facto monopolies, but then sometimes the FTC says no, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, and I practiced in Albany, New York, and there are 2 legacy health systems. They hate each other. They will always hate each other. It's almost unfathomable that no matter how compelling the business case was, that they would work together. It's just the way it is. In Cleveland, you're either chocolate or vanilla. That is Case or Cleveland Clinic. Every single provider, every single hospital system in that entire area is chocolate or vanilla. That's it. And they're both too big to fail. I think from the payer perspective, having at least 2 helps you out, right? Because if there's one, then you have issues. And I think that's behind the FTC, for example, saying there's a limit on how much you can consolidate this market because it will hurt way more than it could possibly help in any way, shape, or form.
Interesting yet that they collaborate on a medical school in Cleveland.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Even when we were thinking about life science companies and talking about these particular issues, we're always thinking about it from that payer perspective, the relationship between the payer and the hospital system and who actually has the market power and who you're going to need to negotiate with, and it's always a balancing act.
So one of the there's so much terminology that is part of the current language of healthcare delivery that I find troublesome, and we can't enumerate on all of them, but one that comes up a lot is patient engagement, and the argument has been that often that IDNs can do this better than traditional independent private practice can do. Now, clearly, they can build phenomenally architecturally distinct facilities. Cancer centers with 20-story atriums. But what does that really mean for patient engagement? A Starbucks in the lobby is patient engagement? So I'm trying to understand, what is it? What are we talking about when we talk about patient engagement? Where is it relevant to clinical outcomes? Where does that patient satisfaction really relate to the experience, which is better healthcare, not the experience of a better environment? But I'm curious because it's often touted as a differentiator for IDNs.
Well, I think again it gets back to having that breadth of services and patient engagement. There are a range of things, but one that certainly bubbles to the top is adherence, for instance, and having the ability to whether it's to engage that patient at certain points along the continuum. If they're not adhering to their therapy, there are so many options to be able to engage that patient throughout the course of their therapy. And I think that IDNs are fairly well equipped to do that if they have the technology in place to do it, because they're able to coordinate their care better, make sure that they're getting their meds. If they have issues, make sure they're getting to the right place, shift their site of care. If it's cheaper to go here than there. I mean, there are a whole host of things in terms of patient engagement that you can do.
So it's interesting because in my experience talking to doctors, they will argue that that's exactly what is the benefit of being in a community private practice, where the doctors all know each other, than in the huge monolith institutional setting where nobody knows who you are and where there is none of those things. It's just interesting, the perspective.
Well, I think, again, it gets to, we're not there now,
right,
but we could certainly be there. And I think that from a services standpoint, they would be very well equipped to do that.
But I just want to, I think when I think of patient engagement, I really think about patients being a participant in their care, about really being a stakeholder in their care and helping to facilitate their care. And while IDNs do have a lot of resources, you can have care managers, case managers, you have a lot of people. One of the things that I find fascinating is there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of technologies that can enable patient engagement, whether it's automated phone calls, whether it's apps, there are a whole host of technology solutions. It's the connected scale for your congestive heart failure patient that sends an alert to the nurse who can say, "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Smith, gained 4 pounds yesterday," or the patient being prompted to call. So I think as we leverage those things, I think community docs can leverage a lot of these things because these are very scalable from the very small to the very large, and I think that's going to help a lot.
Well, I think that just brings us full circle back to our original mergers, acquisitions discussion about Amazon or Google or Apple and the disruptive forces here to make these types of things possible.
So I'll offer a cynical response that most at this point of the technology solutions have been embraced by the worried, and the wealthy, and not by the patients who really need them. And it'll be interesting to see if that's going to change. But I think we all hope it does. We all hope that's part of that solution.
Well, Mike and I both alluded to the millennials in different ways. And I go back to that they demand it. I think we all have kids. We know that our kids are attached to their phones. And whether they're in their 20s or rising, that's not going to go away. And we have to have solutions to be able to utilize.
Yeah, they care more they care less that their doctor went to Harvard and more that their doctor answers their email.
Absolutely.
And I am really serious about that.
You're absolutely right.
And so I do think that the playing field is going to change big time.
Well, guys, we've come to the end of another segment. As always, this has been a great discussion. Before we end, I'd like to ask each of you for maybe one last insight regarding either of the topics we talked about today. So kind of a closing comment. We'll start over here with Mike and go first.
I would say that the world is changing, and it's going to change in ways that we cannot predict. We should be humble in how well we are doing things today. We should be open to the possibility that innovative solutions will allow us to do things even better. And so rather than arch our backs and decide we're just going to resist all of this stuff, think 2, 3, 4 steps down the line. How is this going to make the care of my patients or of my family members better in the end? And if we do that, then I think we'll get to a better place.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say that we are at a critical juncture. I think everyone agrees that things are not sustainable, either on the public side or on the commercial side. And I think everyone is working really, really hard to find solutions. Kind of to Mike's point, just we need to stiffen our backs because we ultimately will get there. And I think that there are really exciting things that are a little bit down the road that will help us to get there. But we will definitely get there. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on right now.
I think there's a lot of potential. I think two thoughts that come to mind is first that we as providers need to make sure that we drive as much of this change as we possibly can rather than have government or other folks tell us, because at the end of the day, provider organizations, whether they're community or health systems, are the ones at the point of the spear caring for patients. And the other thing I would say is looking at everything through the lens of anytime you're looking to innovate or change something, how are you creating value? Are you improving outcomes? Are you either maintaining cost or decreasing cost, so that at the end of the day you're creating that value, and most importantly creating that value for the patient.
Panelists, thank you. On behalf of the panel, we thank you for following this fall 2018 program of the American Journal of Managed Care's Oncology Stakeholder Summit series. We hope you found this peer exchange informative and that you'll join us again as the series continues.